This is a national issue.
Indeed.
It has always been a national issue.
Indeed.
And when you talk about development, it needs to be inclusive, holistic, leaving no one behind. So when you have the issues of teenage pregnancies not being addressed, you are having a sect of people being left behind. These are the teenagers, the girls. Already we have inequality gaps. Already we have different vulnerabilities which women face, yes. So when you talk about teenage pregnancy, you're bringing in the aspect of involving the youth, because our population, it's a young population. So teenage pregnancy, it's an issue that needs to be addressed because you are talking about maternal health. You have a teenage mother, even young as 10, we have seen on social media.
Indeed.
Young people 10 and she's pregnant, so you do not expect her to give birth. She will die in the process. So this is not a matter of debate or PR. It's a matter of life and death. These are people's lives, and we need to have all stakeholders on board.
Indeed.
We need to have all hands on deck, and that is why we're here to also talk about the government role, because this is not a blame game. It is creating awareness that we need all stakeholders involved. Yes, there is the primary role of the parents, but this is also now at a national level that institutions need to be involved. We need to civil society on board, but also we need government on board, because this is you're speaking in the context of a country, so there needs to be an enabling environment where development partners can act and also come on board to work on the situation. So the importance of this discussion is national. Everyone is involved, and when we start talking about government role, we don't want the government to see it as an attack. And it's also very telling when the government goes on the defensive. Why are you going on the defensive? Why don't you come and have a table discussion? Because this is something that involves the whole nation, so we need to have all hands on deck, and we need to have all stakeholders involved.
And you believe, as the Women's Probono Initiative, schools should have been open as soon as yesterday, because this is the safest haven for our women and girls?
Yes, partly yes, but it's not only the safest haven, because also even when the students go back to school, they return home, and also the school setting, students can still get pregnant even in the school setting.
Even the teachers sometimes take advantage.
Yes, so even the guidelines that the government has made for mitigating teenage pregnancy, they are structured for the school setting.
Indeed.
But now what do we do within the communities? Now what do we do now that the students are at home? The government needs to look at it from an angle of being proactive and not reactionary. Yes. All
right, let's also bring in Patrick Murungi. He is the legal officer for the Women's Pro Bono Initiative. From your findings, Patrick Murungi, and observations, what is the trend of teenage pregnancy within this country, taking into account the effects compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you so much, Romeo, and good morning to the viewers out there. So the trend in of teenage pregnancies before and during COVID. COVID has showed that teenage pregnancies have actually boiled over, and we have had a huge increase in teenage pregnancies during this period of time. So if you look at the statistics before, there is UNICEF has produced a report in 2016 about these trends, and you notice that in rural areas we have about 27% of girls getting pregnant. We have 19% in urban areas, and that discrepancy exists because of a number of factors which we shall discuss later on the show. But when you look at the current report, you'll also notice that the rural areas have been more affected in this period of time, because Daily Monitor, I think, did a particular reporting a few days ago, and you'd see areas of Kabong, areas of Oyam, you'd see all those areas, and you go to Kasese, you see those rural areas have been affected so much.
Especially
the numbers are high.
So you had fathers sleeping with their own daughters. It was very callous.
Yes, so that too is a big problem. And if you look at the statistics more on a closer level, you'll notice that 1 in every 4 adolescent girls actually gets pregnant
within the rural setting.
Within the rural setting, but also even on a national scale. On a national scale, beyond that, you will notice that I have looked at a policy issued by the Ministry of Education on prevention and management of teenage pregnancies, and they have a bit of statistics in there. But they note that 36% of girls actually adolescent girls actually get pregnant. I mean 36% of girls. Of adolescent girls are sexually active, but of these 36%, about 80% do get pregnant. But even of the 80%, 97% do not get to drop out of school. So we have about 3% of those who get pregnant staying in school. That is even before the pandemic. Now, with the pandemic coming into place, you note that you'll have many of these not going back to school because of the environment. It is not as supportive as it should be for these girls, but also the nature of having a child in school when you're also a child is in and of itself a bit difficult.
And a distraction.
And a big distraction, and has huge ramifications for that.
Where has the problem been common, looking at your findings within the rural and urban setups? Where has the problem been common?
The problem has actually been common in rural settings, and this is the reason. The biggest driver is possibly, in my opinion, poverty, because there's a bit of a.
So this is pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, rural areas were affected most, and even during the pandemic.
Even during the pandemic, there's a project we ran in Karamoja at the start of this year, and we discovered that the girls there are actually going through a bit of a huge difficulty in maybe in access of say sanitary towels, and so you have girls sitting in sand during the times of their period, of their periods. So you have these men who are willing to give the sanitary towels, and when they are doing this, they are getting something in return.
All right.
And so that is how they have enticed these girls to actually get pregnant. Cross-generational sex is taking place, and also, if you notice, many of these girls lack the basics, because if you look at the urban areas,
so poverty is the biggest driver.
Poverty is the biggest driver. If you look at the urban areas, for example, you have many of these children, with all due respect, in gated communities. They are not moving out. They are ordering most of their things online. But in rural areas, you have a child or a girl traveling a long distance to go and fetch water, to go and access some of these basics. And in that period of time, they get to get in harm's way in most of the time. And so that, for me, is part of the biggest problem.
All right, that is Patrick Murungi, the legal officer with the Women's Pro Bono Initiative. We also do have Maria Bukirwe. Maria, let's talk about the other causes of the skyrocketing teenage pregnancies in Uganda, beyond what you've noticed during this COVID-19 pandemic. What are some of the other causes?
Some of the other causes of the teenage pregnancy, Patrick has mentioned poverty, and when you talk about finances, they're cross-cutting. So also the poverty affects the parenting lifestyles. You'll have like, for example, women were sleeping in markets. You can imagine an environment where a mother has to go with her young girl to the market setting. The security in the market setting. You can imagine what happens to such a young girl. Then also another situation where the mother has to leave the young children at home. They're sleeping in a market setting, and the young child is left at home to take care of other young children. But then also there is an information gap, and this is mainly in the rural setting. The issue of the language barriers. There are all these policies that have been made by the government, and the government has made commitments to have them translated, to have them disseminated in far to reach areas, but this has only been on paper. We have not seen it translate into action. So you will have areas where there is a cultural norms and cultural settings settings where young girls as early as the age of 12 or 14, once you start your menstruation, you are seen ready for marriage. And that is a cultural setting that has also been fueled by the pandemic. Girls are being seen as a commodity, and this is not only also in the cultural setting in rural areas, but we have seen on social media where women are being objectified even by top officials, or you are seeing people who you'd consider elites who would know these issues better. When you talk about teenage pregnancy, gender equality comes into play, but we have seen issues of sexual harassment online, and this also translates into the physical sexual harassment. You have seen online gender-based violence, but also this translates physically. And then when you talk about enforcement agencies, these are agencies which are viewed in the eyes of the people not as user-friendly. When you talk about the police, the first thing that comes to people's mind is not something they can run to for protection, but rather something they run from. So also those factors where the implementing partners are not accommodative of the situation.
Because you've had reports of police actually colluding with the criminals, where they pay off the police officers and they go scot-free.
Yes, we have seen issues where the families are being told to settle. Just recently we were in Chirandongo refugee settlement, and we were addressing young girls, talking about gender-based violence, and we were asking them what issues they face, and they were talking about how gender-based violence in the refugee settlement is seen as something, as a small issue, something you can talk about. Yeah, they just slapped you, or these are some small things, you go and settle it out. A young girl has been defiled, and they are being told to settle it out, talk it over, and maybe marry off the girl, and then maybe you preserve the reputation of the family. But this is not only seen in those settlements, it's also in some urban settings where young girls are sold off or exchanged for bride price. But then also the patriarchal setting, yes, where more importance is placed on the boys, and then you see a place where girls are being neglected, so they resort to other activities, and then you also see where the blame is always on the girl. Just recently we had a talk show, and one of the callers called in, and they said that it's the girl's choice if she chooses to go off with a man. But you are talking of a situation where girls are being defiled. Even media reporting, when you see the issue of teenage pregnancy, it's a bit packaged in a way where it's tolerable, but we should put it in bold red, capitalized. This is defilement. Of
course, it's defilement, it's intolerable, and of course the First Lady, who also dabbles as the Education Minister, Janet Museveni, is attributing all this to poor parenting, irresponsible parenting. That's what she says. Do you agree with her?
No, I don't agree with her, because there are other factors in play. Of course, there is a place of poor parenting, and yes, that can be acknowledged. But what happens where the parents have done their best, everything has been put in play, and then children are being defiled, and then also structures that are set up by the government are just on paper and not translated into policy and action. And then people who are in place of authority are also abusing the systems. When you talk about teenage pregnancy, it's a manifestation of gender-based violence and violence against women, which is also part and parcel with systemic discrimination.
Thank you very much, Maria Bukira. Before I let you go, Patrick Murungi should give us his last pointers when it comes to recommendations on what government should be doing and other stakeholders. Sexuality education and access to contraceptives. There's been resistance from some sections of society. What is your view before I let you go?
Okay, great. So in respect to that, I think we need to look at it beyond just the now. We need to look at it we need to give it a lens whereby we look at what would be happening in about 10 to 15 years, because the children or those girls that are going to give birth now are going to have we're going to have a huge number of children who will not have gone to school, probably a huge number of children who will not have access to to education, and this boils over to low productivity of the country. So what I would suggest that the country does, the World Health Organization has given us guidelines, and those guidelines are pretty simple. It's a three-pronged approach. You have at the tip the government that enforces its policies, that improves its health system. You have on this tip the community and the family. You have on this tip the individual themselves. What are you supposed to be doing?
Indeed.
So in all those,
it's
multifaceted
in its approach. Thank you very much, Patrick Murungi, the legal officer with the Women's Pro Bono Initiative, and also Maria Bukira, the communications manager with the same initiative. We will also continue trumpeting these recommendations to the government like we've always done. Thank you very much. And of course, there's another conversation largely centering on the women within the informal sector. We'll have Florence Achiro and also Ms. Tukahirwe Martha coming through shortly after this break. We'll be right back.